Alright. Observation 1 is going to be the resolutional analysis. Supplement A, the resolution. The United States federal government should provide material support to aid in the enforcement of the United Nations Arms Embargo in Libya. B is going to be the all-inclusive policy net benefits. Is the best criterion for this round as allows equal access to the most predictable burdens and methods of replication. Observation 2 is going to be the background. One is that U.S. Security Council has imposed an arms embargo on Libya, or they imposed it in February 2011. The second point here is that Rwanda's UN Ambassador Eugene Richard Gosnia said that the trade the arms trade has continued and that smuggling has been coming through largely the southern borders. Additionally, has been coming through largely the southern borders. The third argument here is that on March 11th, the UN Security Council said that post-Gaddafi, Libya became the epicenter for arms trading, and it's directly influencing conflicts in 14 different countries. Additionally, the rebels control 3 different ports that are allowing in arms. The plain text is: the United States federal government, through the Department of Defense, will provide militarized drones to surveil the southern border of Libya to aid in the enforcement of UN Nations Arms Embargo.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, he's gonna get you all the copy. Solvency is going to be that one. Drones can pick out areas in the smugglers. This is a region where there is not many places to hide. A lot of it is open terrain, which means that they will be able to see the methods in which they are using to smuggle the drones in. Additionally, the southern border is a low population area, which means that there is very low propensity for there to be civilian casualties, as well as for them to miscalculate and see the wrong person, which means that they are going to be able to attack the smugglers directly. Additionally, we would argue that since we haven't been able to hamper them entirely, it is necessary to just completely shut off these routes, and the only way to do this is through militarized drone strikes on the smugglers. Going on to advantage 1, checking international conflict. A is going to be the uniqueness. One, you can cross-apply the background that 14 countries have been fueled by this. We specifically isolate scenarios that they are funneling guns to ISIS and Boko Haram, as well as Al-Qaeda in several different regions. These have created for the increase of terror when they give access to these arms, to these FTOs. The second argument here is that France is posturing. The little A says that on Monday they released a statement saying that they are prepared to strike across Libya's border because of the current attacks on France. Additionally, they have a military base in Niger, which is only 100 kilometers away from the border, meaning that they have the ability to carry out the strike at any moment that they wish to do this. The solvency is that 1, you increase the enforcement, you allow for the proper surveillance, as well as the action. The United Nations has not been able to act on their surveillance yet, which has been a key reason why they haven't been able to fix this. When you allow for the action, you can cut off these routes. The second argument is that when you stop the smuggling out, it hampers the conflicts in the 14 other nations, as well as hampering ISIS, as well as hampering the FTO's ability to strike out and use their armed weapons to expand. The third point here is that plan appeases France. It appeases France, and it gives them the idea that, or it gives them the perception that we are helping their security concerns. The main reason why they want to strike is because they feel threatened after the recent terrorist attack, and they will understand that security is not that much of an issue once we do this. The little A here is that the president asked for this plan. He said that the U.S. needs to actually do something about this, and that the UN not having a sufficient smuggling effort has directly contributed to attacks on different soils, so they would be completely on board with this. The first impact here is going to be checking terror. The little A is that you can cross by the arms are fueling ISIS. The little B is that this destabilizes regions and allows for a cycle of this violence. You can see that when we have governments continuously being overthrown, it just leads to more revolutions and then inner conflicts within the region, which just continues to count up death tolls and kills people in the region, as well as killing civilians. Additionally, these create human rights abuses because a lot of these groups have very poor views of minorities in the region, such as women. They try to specifically, you can look to the fact that ISIS has tried to keep women from going to school or even leaving the house without male supervision. You can see that these human rights are something that we should all be allowed to have. The second here is that you stop French strike. A French strike would immediately create a Libya re-attack. Libya said that if someone attacks their government directly, that they will retaliate, which would create another international conflict and just continue it would start a new conflict in this region. Advantage 2, Turkey relations. Uniqueness. One is that Turkey is concerned about terror right now. The little A is that there is a fighting going on their border, and this border has become extremely malleable due to the Kurdish ISIS fight right on their border. And ISIS has been expanding at an unprecedented rate. They are the largest terrorist organization in the world, boasting almost 30,000 members right now and growing, which means that they have the propensity to push over the Kurdish forces who haven't been backed up. The little b is that they haven't received U.S. support in the region, and they've been asking for this, which means that their concerns are just being realized. The second is that Turkey's economy is dependent on contracts, and instability in the region makes it so that they can't get contracts on their soil, meaning that their economy is on the brink, and investors are scared off due to the terrorist threats and the perception of this. The second is that Turkey relations with the U.S. are on the brink now. The little A here is that there have been rumors that we are going to arm the Kurds. These rumors are pushing Turkey against us because they fear that the Kurds will turn on them next, and after they're done with ISIS, which is just stretching things further. The little B here is that the oil war is starting to begin, and they fear that they're going to get in an all-out economic battle with the United States, which will hurt their economy even further. And the U.S. has been the main pusher of pushing oil prices down, which has created a direct tension and a brink as of now. The sovereignty. One is that we increase enforcement and we stop the flow of weapons to these regions, which means that ISIS isn't no longer pushing on their borders. So the perception of ISIS expansion into the region isn't going to be working. The second here is that the perception of ISIS not being able to push into their border is going to allow for investor confidence that will spill over and allow for their economy to maintain. The third here is that the perception of the U.S. backing is going to increase soft power. That the U.S. motive is going to increase soft power, and the U.S. motive in the region is to stop the genocide of the Kurdish people that Turkey's currently engaging in. If we create negotiable terms, then we have the ability to stop Turkey's government from killing off this culture. The impacts here is that one, you increase soft power, which allows us to negotiate around the region and check back a lot of different things. Additionally, you save Turkey from economic collapse, which will save hundreds of thousands of people from poverty and keep them so that way they can continue to survive. The second impact here is you check the Kurdish genocide. Culturicide is one of the most damning impacts is one of the biggest impacts, because when they are literally killing off people just because of who they are and what they represent, it only continues and perpetuates the logic of genocide.
Alright, we'll start flex now. Yeah, Libya doesn't border Turkey. How are you stopping the insurgent groups in Turkey?
You are correct. Libya does not border Turkey. However, their arms are getting to Turkey, or not necessarily Turkey, but their arms are getting to ISIS to ISIS groups, which are fighting Turkey and pushing into Turkey because they're right on Turkey's side.
Why would they not just go around the country?
Go around the country?
Yeah, why is Libya key? I guess. Why?
Libya is key because of the fact that they are the ones who are fueling the arms deals in the other countries. Like we said, they're the epicenter of the arms trade in the region.
A lot of the arms specifically came from the former Gaddafi regime, where the government had stockpiles of these weapons, and then in the transition, a lot of these weapons got lost or claimed by other groups. And now the arms embargo and the enforcement.
What about the arms that they have right now? Do you take the guns out of their hands right now?
No, it is key to stopping it in the future.
I get this. Here is going to be 1, 2. Four off.
Can I borrow one more piece of paper from someone, please? I told you I'm a minimalist. Thank you.
The laptop one.
I'll talk to you that off camera.
All right.
The answer you told me.
That's fair.
Case in order.
Where are you starting on case? Just like
And then it's what I'm going to shoot.
Okay, not top case.
Cool.
Thank you.
We all good? Interpretation. Interpretation. Material assistance means training personnel and expert advice. Interpretation. Material assistance means training personnel and expert advice. This is the definition according to the United States military. This is the standard used when getting coordinated. This is an actual topic. The point is violation. They don't do this. They end up sending drones without any sort of personnel attached. The point of the standards first ground is absolutely critical to develop negative ground. To be able to generate disadvantages off of using the military. The second argument is fairness. We only have 20 minutes to prep this, and let's face it, the arms embargo in Libya isn't something a lot of people have written a lot of debate arguments about yet. This probably means it's crucial for us to use the actual terms that we are familiar with which are things like material assistance. Next is we say negative flexibility is key. Your interpretation means there are literally an infinite number of affirmatives, which means the negative is never an implication to debate the key point of voters. First off, we say this is not a voting issue for issues of fairness in education. Second, we say, well, wake up, God, and competing interpretations. Just that. Peace talks are working now. You derail them. Unique just one is the violence in Libya is increasing right now. We see the violence between the East and West each have their own governments, and then there was an attack last week that killed 20 individuals. The second argument is, however, yesterday Libyan factions agreed to hold peace talks in Geneva. Next week, this is because of the UN-supported mission in Libya, which is responsible for the new peace talks by a heavy consultation, which is extremely difficult. This is the first time these two have been brought together since before Gaddafi. Next, we say that it is they're going to reach a conclusion and develop a unity government. This is according to the head of the UN mission in Libya. This will succeed diplomats see this is a form of reintegration of the global community. Al Jazeera article just published the other day says that fighters on each side want to be seen as reintegrated into the global community. See, this is absolutely critical for their credibility as a state, which they are all fighting for. Third argument is the EU chief diplomat said that Libya is at a crucial junction right now because people don't understand that People don't understand the situation. More specifically, they say that this is the last chance that we are on the. If this fails, if these talks fails, Libya will plummet back into a civil war that is going to be far worse than the one before. Current Libyan talks, the current talks are seen as heavily Libyan, without a lot of Western influence, and that is one reason they're being so successful. Fourth argument is the U.S. has a completely awful history in regards to Libyan relations. Like we were extremely late to the fight with Gaddafi, which means that thousands of extra people died. A lot of people still have high amounts of resentment for that, and we also have taken a long time in reaffirming and affirming either of the governments in the East or West that have risen up recently. Onto the links first, because the plan causes the U.S. to intervene. The plan causes the U.S. to intervene. This likely means that the U.S. is going to try to use political sway in order to influence the talks, and the U.S. will ask for a seat at the table. The second argument is the plan leads to the perception that the U.S. will intervene in the talks and cause the Western government, cause the more Westernized government to take over in the talks. Which probably the third argument is this perception means that the talks are just going to fail because it's going to look too heavily influenced. Means that both parties are going to back down because they no longer see this as common ground. They're just looking led and keep their integration with the international community. The next link is that the perception that the U.S. is just attempting to retaliate in Benghazi in order to securitize the region, in order to protect Republicans because of the strong discourse that's coming out of the far right. On to the implications. First, we say this turns case massive amount of civil unrest is probably really bad for arms trafficking. It probably means that the increased instability makes it extremely hard for Kurdish forces to get support from anywhere else. Turns back both the internal link, the implications of both the advantages. The second argument is this creates a new external civil war, which is much larger than what we had before, killed off tens of thousands of people. The third argument is this leads to a regional power vacuum. We would say that the complete collapse of the government makes Israel freak out because they see the arms trafficking that goes through a actually pretty close place nearby in Gaza to Gaza is absolutely critical. It means Israel feels the need to fight, and this draws in security guarantees and causes great power wars, which risks exchange because we guns try or die for upholding security guarantees. Same thing that caused World War I. Counterplan text. France should move its forces from the southern border of Libya to aid Turkish forces. Counterplan text. France should move its forces from the southern border of Libya to aid Turkish forces. There's a copy.
Thank you.
Yes. Conditional. Counterplan solvency. Well, this is mutually exclusive by the disadvantages. Moving fast probably alleviates pressure off of the Libyan government. It looks like the United Nations is sincere in its efforts. Second, we say this helps Turkey because it means that Turkey has access to massive amounts of forces. More specifically, France has some of the best trained special operatives in the world, all of which are pretty eager to help combat terrorism right now due to recent situations. Anything else about that, Stephen?
No, it's good.
Well, also, obviously, it's going to solve all the disadvantages. Alleviates pressure means that they get to combat violent groups in the Middle East. Critique? First, you conflate the idea of the Islamic State with Islam. We say that use of the term ISIS or Islamic State ends up inherently creating a neurological connection between how we view Islam and the Islamic State. There is actually a Newsweek study that was published last year that shows a direct correlation between exposure to the usage of the word ISIS and U.S. opinion on Muslims in America. We say that the use of the term ISIS actually assumes that, one, there is such thing as an Islamic State, when in reality Islam is an extremely vast and diverse religion. I'll get to you in flex time. It's an extremely vast and diverse religion, but in reality this makes us all think that all all of Muslims are just the same and are fighting for the same thing. The second argument leads to drastically increased instances of Islamophobia because suddenly we have this conflated idea that we need to not just wage war on the Islamic State, but it becomes conflated with the idea to wage war on Islam just because of the way that words is actually has very real implications of policy on the implications. First, into this case, because this is the root cause for terror recruitment in the status quo. They use things like Islamophobia in order to justify things. For example, many Islamic news sites right now are publishing articles that are just how offensive the Western response to the issue over Charlie Hebdo is in the status quo. Second, we say this creates violence against Islam. We don't need some fancy metaphor here. The U.S. invasion of Iraq has killed over 200,000 innocent people, 2/3 of which were murdered by violent direct action, another third of which were killed by U.S. intervention. The U.S. goes on great words of expansionism when we do not accurately identify the action of solvency. We say instead reject the phrase Islamic State and instead to call the group Daesh. This is the Arabic acronym for the group, which actually Daesh hates a lot because it sounds like one who sows discontent, which is also the same phrase many Arabics use for the group. France also began using the phrase Daesh as opposed to the Islamic State. Next, we say that rejection is absolutely critical. We say rejection not an alternative. Gives the judge an up-down vote on Islamophobia. This is uniquely good because since Islamophobia has no center of power, we need to reject it in every instance possible. Next, we say the rhetoric shapes reality. We say that because of the screen, the only thing that matters at the end of the debate round are our rhetorical choices. Advantage 1. We say you don't solve. You look into the plan text and look at the part where they say militarized drones to surveil. If we take a surveillance drone or a militarized drone to surveil, what happens is we isolate a certain type of drone that does not have missiles on it and does not come with a crew. Meaning that if you give a bunch of these drones to the United Nations doesn't have the ability to bomb any of the people you are isolating. They can just see them. So this causes a couple of things. First, it leads to massive amounts of United Nations overstretch because they suddenly need to hire massive new amounts of drone operators. Drones require massive teams of at least 20 individuals per drone in order just to get them off of the ground. This doesn't include surveillance teams for people to identify it, but furthermore, drones also mean that you need somebody to go out and verify a target, but also since these are surveillance drones like you have identified in your plan tags, this means that you don't actually end up bombing any of the people. It means you just overstretch the United Nations more because you take away people who are otherwise combating and enforcing the arms embargo and make them just go look at other people. You say so yourself in your solvency that the United Nations has the ability to track, they just can't engage with everybody right now, means that you don't have any propensity to solve. If anything, you just make the situation worse. And that's when you say that the drones aren't very accurate because their follow-up. This probably means that there is no propensity that you ever end up solving any of the case. Anything else about Stephen?
You're good.
Okay. On to the advantage one. Quick argument here. We say counterpunch uniquely able to solve because only by engaging in the talks are we able to kick the arms traffickers out. The arms traffickers are just taking advantage of the situation in Libya and the unrest to use it as a hub. That is the only reason they are there. They're not there because the rebel groups on either side want it. The rebel groups on the two governments simply want stability and are using simply want stability. And as soon as their government gets recognized and legitimate, they are going to force the arms traffickers out of the country on their own. Meaning counterplan gets to supercharge the talks that are happening now, and the counterplan get to supercharge the solvency for the advantage one. Advantage 2. One argument. Counterplan probably solves way better. You say they get a few less guns. We say they have some of the best special operations forces in the world that are just eager and trained to combat terrorism because that's what they've been doing, just waiting on the south border. They're not sitting there drinking margaritas. They're training to combat terrorists.
Okay, so you admit in your critique that in the English translation, the Islamic State calls itself the Islamic State, right?
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be wrong to identify them as something other than what they wish to be called?
No, because they're
in groups.
a group of people who murder innocent civilians and force children into soldierhood and slavery.
And your argument is that us calling them by the name they want to be called is us saying that all Muslims are of the same sect.
No, our argument is that there's a neurological connection between the use of the phrase Islamic State and Islamophobia that occurs in the United States, which has forced countless individuals out of mosques and out of cities in the United States, and it's a gross mischaracterization of Islam, frankly.
But wouldn't if people do understand the differences, is it still problematic to call
We're saying
them
that
that?
the people, when you say Islamic State, people don't understand the difference.
And the people who do call them Daesh.
The order is going to start top Cali. We're going to the case today. And then, as soon as I find this damn flow, wherever it went, we're going to go to the disad. And that'll be the panel plan. And then the criticism. That's everybody ready? make sure that happens. Okay. We are good to go. First on top county, we are providing advice by providing drones and the drones. We are advising that they should be able to do that. They should utilize the drones. Second is that your interpretation is bad because it could devise material assistance with the top says material support is an indication to why this is bad interpretation. Third is that the counter interpretation that material support, according to the United States Department of Defense, includes expert advice, training, personnel, and equipment. Fourth, we need our counter interpretation because we are providing equipment to the enforcement of the embargo. Five is counter standards. First, that this is best for topics for field context because it's not only coming from the Department of Defense, but also it includes is more inclusive of the actual terms of the resolution. But it will be is that this is better for negative ground because it includes a more inclusive definition of what could actually become material support and potential fix that could have different kinds of material support in case it's a better definition. You say fairness, however, this just because there's not a lot of big arguments about this doesn't mean that it's not a good topic, and this is not a good affirmative. It's an indication of why we are still topical. There's not been a loss of ground. Additionally, you had ground in this debate. You could argue was why you not have not only a critique but a counter plan, and this indicates that there's no loss of ground in this debate. Additionally, you say prefer reasonability. As long as we are reasonably topical, take questions and flex indicates that you should prefer our interpretation because your friends they use to remote to stop so that we never be able to access. What?
I see the counter interpretation.
Includes material support, includes expert advice, training, personnel, and equipment.
Potential abuses are enough to vote on topicality.
Additionally, potential abuses not enough to vote, not a reason to vote on topicality. It's like voting on charging someone for a crime that they potentially could commit. Assault. They make arguments about how we can't solve this way because the drones don't have missiles. However, we say that they are militarized drones, which indicates that they would have the missiles and the support crew, but they are utilizing them for surveilling of the region. You can look at the fact that in the context not only of the PMC, but also the context of the way that this has interacted as an indication to how they would be able to do strikes. So you can look to the context of the status quo that says that they're already surveilling the region, indicates that there's propensity for us to be able to resolve this. You say this leads to the United Nations overstretched because they would have to hire drone operators. The United Nations is a big organization that has a lot of money. It's an indication how they probably hire worse PMCs to do this, or you look at the fact that France has done things like drones or strikes in the past. An indication of how they'd probably be able to resolve this because they're already within the region. The next argument is that they say that we make them surveil other groups. Not only is that probably a good thing because in case they can enforce the embargo, but also probably resolves all the harms. There's no reason why this is bad. Evangeline? They say that armed traders are only taking advantage of the instability. Much of the complex time will tell you that the arms are coming out of the Libyan region because of the fact that the Gaddafi regime led to a gross number of additional forces. Indicates that the additional arms indicates that only the affirmative that is able to enforce the existing arms embargo is necessary. Additionally, the trade routes are key. The longer if you take the longer route is an indication of how different governments, different police forces are more likely to catch the arms and armed traders. Indicates that the affirmative is able to solve. Additionally, you say the capital solves this. However, no because of the fact that specifically the enforcement of the drones along the Libyan border is an indication of how this is necessary, especially since the Libya and Turkey don't share a border, indicating only the trading of the arms across this region is necessary to be able to resolve this. Evasion. You say the only argument you make is that the counterplan solves better. However, it doesn't resolve for any of the perception that they were giving you about the United States and Turkey and how the specific analysis about how the United States and Turkey relations are breaking down, but the plans necessary to resolve this. None of your Westernism arguments are effective in this instance. Means the affirmative not only means the issue is a dissenting counterplan. The peace talks advantage? Sorry. First argument is no think that that is not going to proceed as an intervention by the United States because the fact that not only are we giving them to the United Nations, which is already part of the peace talks, indicates that there's no indication as to why this is going to collapse this petition. Second argument is turn that we prevent France from striking extremists within the Libyan country. Indicates that the Libyan government and both parties have indicated that if there were a strike by France, it would lead to both of them would retaliate against the West. Indicates this will probably lead to a breakdown even worse. Indicates we can cross. The analysis we gave you earlier. Additionally, the third argument is trying to be better able to bolster the peace talks by showing that the United States is interested within the region of mix, and it shows both parties that the United States wants to create the change and will support the transition to the government. Indicates that this will better be able to break it down. Additionally, next argument is trying to you make arguments about how Israel would freak out. However, the argument is that the United States President will probably assure Israel to defend freak out scenario because the fact that Israel supports supports and trust the United States indicates that our presence in the region will probably resolve that for the harm that you talked about. Additionally, the next argument is that there's no reason why, the next argument is that there's no reasons why this class of peace talks, even if it looked like United States intervention, it would probably mean that both parties would just go to talks in Libya, because of the fact that you make arguments about how this is a Libya-driven peace talks indicates that there's no reason why they would need to happen in Geneva. They would still be able to happen. Counterpoint. First argument is permanently both. There's no reasons why these two things are mutually exclusive. You can have the United States provide militarized drones and have France move its forces, because of the fact that we are both operating out of the same base in Niger, in case the France is not necessary for the enforcement of either of these things, means the permutation probably results. Additionally, the next argument is that the perm probably shields links to this, because it means that France is able to do more to support the region, while the United States is able to resolve the arms embargo. Means it probably results in internal harm. Additionally, the next argument is that you don't solve for base because you don't solve for the U.S. and Turkey relations, because of the fact that spread that our scenario based on is specific to United States supports. Additionally, the next argument is the disadvantage that you prevent that you cause for Additionally, the next argument is disadvantage that you allow France to work more closely with Turkey in order to enforce genocidal policies. Our argument is that France has been traditionally poor on human rights issues, and most of that France has done nuclear waste in Wadi to Somalian coast indicates that only putting these two groups together, that such Turkey has taken anti-attack attacks on the Kurdish forces indicates that putting together these groups would probably bad and only lead to worse human rights abuses. Only the United States is able to check back against this violence. See? First argument is turn to the plan and reject the word ISIS and call it Daesh instead. That's the text that I got, yeah? Okay.
Can you read that one more time, please?
It's turn to the plan and the alt.
Yeah, we'll call it Daesh instead. Sorry.
Couple of argumentation. First, that the plan text doesn't include the word ISIS indicates that you can affirm the affirmative plan without affirming this specific argumentation. Indicates that we are able that these two things are this condition. Next argument is the disadvantage of the alternative. That erasing the historical past. The argumentation here is that by just renaming things, it only leads to the worst abuses, because the fact that means that we don't have not only political movements and the ability to check back against these things. So you can look to the Black Hawk PMC group as an excellent example of this. That the Black Hawk security organization renamed themselves, and thus they were able to escape a lot of public backlash. In case that indicates this probably is a good addition to that chart. Is the disadvantage that you probably should be going by things by individual self-identification. Even if ISIS on itself is bad, you should always prefer self-identification. Otherwise, it only leads to us renaming and changing the ways that we view other groups in our favor. Indicates this is probably going to be worse. Additionally, your alternative doesn't solve this, because additionally.
They say that only rhetorical choices matter.
Additionally, on the framework arguments, you say that only rhetorical choices matter. However, policymaking should probably be preferred, because it actually only leads to action. Additionally, the rhetoric in this room allows us to change and become policymakers in the future. Indicates you should prefer a policymaker approach.
200 flex.
Yeah.
What alt are you perming?
Look, you say that we need to call them this other word.
Right, but what
Essentially,
alt are you perming?
the fact that we should call them something else. We are basically saying that we can call them by Deus, is it you said?
Deus.
And still do the plan. There's no reason why we can't.
Okay,
This doesn't link to the plan because there's absolutely nothing regarding.
How is the rhetoric the PMC chooses to use different from the advocacy of the PMC?
Our argument is that the plan text is what actually becomes enacted.
So is rhetoric used should affirmatives never be held accountable for the rhetoric used in advantages? If affirmatives say racist, sexist, or homophobic things, should they not be held accountable for
That
it?
is fine, but if you come to the realization that you made that mistake, and then you decide to change your mindset, that is the exact solvency that you were asking for, and that is the solvency that we grant you by saying we realize the problem and we change our mindset.
And I think we can work through the same advocacies and make changes while affirming that we have made mistakes in the past.
All right, ISIS concede. Give me an overview, kind of extending the shell and explaining the argument, and then we'll go into line by line. Everybody ready? All right. At the end of the the round, you're going to be voting for the negative on the ISIS criticism. Our argument is that when you call them ISIS, then you associate an extremist group that has done horrible things with the Islamic State. Calling them the Islamic State has the idea that all of Islam likes this goal. We have shown you through a Newsweek article saying that while the news has used this, i.e. the rhetoric of using and calling them ISIS has led to a massive amount of violence happening against Muslims in the United States, like burning mosques and a massive increase in Islamophobia. You have also conceded that this is the root cause of your case because Islamophobia is one of the main recruiting tools of terrorist groups in the status quo, indicating that your rhetoric does actually have real implications in the round. Additionally, you've conceded our second argument that says that this leads to great wars because in a world in which we don't actually use the correct term, then there's conflation and individuals act violent because of that, indicating that's key. Additionally, you've conceded that in the United States, using this term has caused internal violence against Muslims, like burning mosques. That was also in our framework, indicating you're wrong. Next, you can extend how you should call them Daesh because this is a lot better. Yes, we don't think you should call them the Islamic State because that is associating the religion with the group. In fact, Arabs in the region in France have said that have called out the United States for not switching the official of what we officially call them to Daesh. Additionally, Daesh means one with descent, means one of descent, indicating that no one in the region, i.e. the Muslims also in the region and the other people actually living in there, don't agree that it has anything to do with Islam, indicating that we have to break it away. Next, you can extend how rejection is absolutely key to solve because in a world in which you reject their language, then it changes what they use in the next round, indicating that we can have sort of solvency. But they don't need to solve for every single instance of someone saying ISIS. This is just like them saying something racist. If they said, for instance, an extreme example, the N-word, and then we said you should be voted down for that, we wouldn't have to say, oh, well, people are going to say it anyways. It doesn't matter. You have said something that is offensive, and you've conceded that it conflates the religion with an extremist group who's extremely violent, which has caused violence against Muslims who are actually innocent. On to line by line. On the perm, I don't understand what alternative text they're actually saying. You can't vote for the plan. They concede that they need to be rejected in order for their language choices. If we said that you said something sexist, you can't say perm passed the plan and forget that we said something sexist because once you've said it, you've already conflated these two. Next, you try to say the plan text never says ISIS. Whoa, that shows that you haven't learned from the criticism that you should change your language choices because throughout the entirety of your MG, you still referred to them as ISIS and didn't once call them Daesh, indicating that that is not actually key. Also, the disads prove that you are not willing to change, which is why you have to be voted down. Next, on to the disads. So yeah, there's no alternative text. There's no way there's going to be a perm. Additionally, they have conceded that they still said the word, indicating that as long as they said the word, that is what's bad. On to the disad. You say changing the name erases history. This is false for a few reasons. One, calling them ISIS is what erases the history of Islam and what that religion actually means, which is one that actually promotes peace However, we have conflated Islam with extremist groups in the status quo, and that is because of our language choices. Our Newsweek example literally says that there was a massive spark in violence against Muslims at home and abroad when we started calling this terrorist group ISIS because people thought all they heard was Islamic State, and then they thought that meant Islam is trying to have their own country and have these bad policies, indicating that that's not absolutely true. Additionally, Daesh is what actually, not calling them Daesh actually erases history because it erases the fact that individuals have historically tried to change their name. They want to be called ISIS because they understand that that's a huge recruiting tool for them because they can associate individuals who are Muslim with their religion, which is why other countries in the area and in France, I'll get you in flex time, and in France want to call them Daesh because they want to make a clear rhetorical separation, which is why that is absolutely key. If you just ignore that, then you're ignoring the present, which is also a part of history, indicating that you are actually wrong. Next, you try to say they should be able to self-identify. No, they shouldn't. This is a group indicated by your own impacts that causes massive violence against women, has killed thousands of people, indicating that there's no reason why you should call them and self-identify with them. Additionally, we're not trying to say they shouldn't self-identify themselves as a certain religion. We're just saying you shouldn't group them as the Islamic State. You just try to say self-identification is key. I don't know what any of these impacts are coming out of the MG, but we have clear impacts that indicate that, well, you call them ISIS, you lead to violence in the region, yeah?
The Daesh frequently changes persons' identities from Christians or atheists to match their own.
Yeah, additionally, the days change the identities and change the identities of the people that they recruit in order to and essentially they brainwash them into thinking that this is the only way, indicating that the Daesh are the ones who are actually conflating self-identity, meaning that we need to make sure that we don't call them Islamic. Next. You try to say we shouldn't weigh rhetoric. First of all, you have conceded all the impacts that say the rhetoric actually causes these bad impacts. I think I've explained them enough of the MO. Next, you say that, oh, it's key for policy. However, yeah, you should be voted down so that way, if we are future policymakers, which I don't know anyone who has really become a policymaker out of party, maybe one or two individuals, but most individuals go into like education, which probably means that we should be able to educate people on the actual rhetorical choices of ours, or like lawyers, which really have nothing to do with policymaking. And additionally, policymakers should be informed of the rhetorical choices they've used. The United States has had massive backlash by other countries because we continue to call them ISIS, indicating that we need to have a rhetorical choice. Again, extend the solvency. Additionally, they conceded our last argument that says, one, rhetoric shapes reality, indicating they have no reason why rhetoric doesn't shape reality or why they can all of a sudden sever out of it. This was not made out of the MG, indicating that that's also a response to the perm. Next, they've also conceded that fiat is entirely illusory, which means, sure, you can weigh the impacts of the case, however, they're not real. Because they don't happen. Nothing happens. You don't pass your plan at the end of the round. However, we do learn about the words we've said. Debate, particularly parley, is not one that relies on fiat impacts, but is a rhetorical game that we play in, indicating that you need to be held responsible. Look, this is a very easy decision. If someone came up here and said something blatantly offensive, you would vote them down for it and not have to have any sort of perm or rhetoric shapes reality. They have conceded that conflating ISIS, calling them the Islamic State, and with an extremist group has led to massive violence in the status quo, and it is time that we take a stance and change the way that we describe this language. It is the only impact in the round that's real. They've conceded that. It is game over. Easy vote for William Jewell.
The other words can be a little bit back up. All of it is obviously going to be about the critique. I'm not splitting the block. It's fine. We're winning some impacts that are just fundamental to the entirety of the affirmative case. We say that the language that you use ends up shaping the reality that you live in. We say that the language that we use has implications on the world outside of the debate round and within the debate round. We say that conflating the ideas of Islam with the Islamic State creates a mindset where people view the need to wage war on Islam, not the war on the Islamic State. That's why we must use the phrase Daesh. That's why you're voting for William Jewell in today's debate. Look, we say you need to reject their language. They get up here and say, we admit, we'll call them Daesh, after they spent the entirety of the MG referring to them as the Islamic State, showing that they are not sincere. Maybe if you really did refer to them as Daesh and showed that you changed when you were referencing the advantages or the disadvantages, we would not have gone for the criticism. But you did, showing that there is still a strong neurological connection, and you are still developing the strong neurological connection that we talk about in the LC and Extend PMO about between the phrases Islamic State and Islam, which further perpetuates this. We have the statistic from Newsweek, which shows a direct correlation between public opinion on Islam and exposure to media calling the group ISIS over the past year. We also say so. That alone should be enough just to completely reject the affirmative team. The language that they have chosen to use is offensive and should be rejected. However, if you want to look past the rhetoric shapes reality arguments and look into the substantive debate, we are still controlling the internal links to all of the implications. More specifically, our arguments about how the #1 recruitment tool for terror groups is their image, or the fact that they are hated by the United States, or the way that we frame them, that Islamophobia is the reason terrorist recruitment is on the rise right now. Meaning that if we can do something to solve back for Islamophobia in this debate round, we can do something to solve back for terror recruitment. That's the internal link to the entirety of your arguments. You say that terrorists are causing bad things to happen in other places. Well, that's because we treat Islam as a violent group in the United States. The only argument the PMR has to go for is the permutation. However, that's not going to work. There's not an alternative for them to perm. So I don't know how that functions in debate lingo, but beyond that, they haven't learned to start calling the group Daesh. The only way to break this neurological disconnect is through rejecting them and the use of the ballot. That is our number 2 solvency argument coming out of the LOC. We say you need to vote them down for this so they stop using the phrase. It's that simple.
Minute now.
Alright. So, we are going to have an overview that's going to be important for you to flow. And then we are going to go to the K, and yeah, that's what's going to happen. Fundamental flaw with this critique. They give you no framework under which it solves for, and they give you no mechanism to actually solve for it. Absent an alternative, they don't actually get access to any of their solvency of their implications, which means that you have to weigh them in the framework of net benefits against the affirmations case. If you do this, they run into problems with the fact that we will straight out weigh on impacts. They do not engage in a lot of our arguments about why these are key things to talk about, and the framing of this critique is going to create problems for either their solvency or their impacts. I want you to extend across the fact that we put this in a net benefit framing. The only thing that's coming out of the LOC shell on framing is that rhetorical choices matter and that they shape the way that we think. This is not sufficient framing. They explode this and try to say that this means that this comes first. This is never the argument coming out, which means that policy implications are always going to be important as well. You can extend across the fact that this creates good policymakers in the future. They say that a lot of debaters go into education, but we would argue that over 70% of Congress was debaters. Was debaters, which means that policymakers are also debaters, and this is important in this arena as well because we need to be able to make good policy to check this back. Additionally, they never tell you why, they never give you any arguments to why we can't learn from our mistakes and move forward. On the PER, if they don't have their framework, if you grant them their framework, they don't have a mechanism of solvency. They have an implicit alternative here, which is basically saying, reject us for using this rhetoric, and that's going to solve everything. The PERM is saying that we can learn from this and move forward and also do the plan. The plan doesn't engage in any of this rhetoric, which means that we can look at the policy implications of it as well as learning from the rhetoric. There is no reason why we can't do this, and there's no reason why we can't engage and call them Daesh in the future and learn from mistakes. They never tell you why it is key. If they actually want to get solvency, if they actually want to do this, then there is no reason why we cannot engage and why the permutation would not solve. But absent framework, they do not actually have a mechanism of solvency, which means that you default to net benefits. And in this round, where they can see the entirety of case, then we have the impacts of solving for Turkish-US relations. When we have the ability to do this, we outweigh with the straight fact that war will perpetually continue. Unending war is always...
It might be a minor argument, but the idea that because of our framework and lack of all, we have no solvency was nowhere in the MG.
The clarification of no alternative came out of the block. The clarification of the entirety of this position really came out of the block.
I'm sure it's under consideration.
Anyways. You can extend across the impacts of the case that we solve for the U.S.-Turkish relations, which solves for the conflict that is happening and solves for culturicide. This is always going to be able to outweigh. They say that they control the internal link to the AF, but they don't control the internal link to Turkish and Kurdish, the U.S.-Turkish relations that solves for the Kurdish genocide, which means that you are not actually being able to do this. So when you extend that across and weigh that across their impacts of people, of individuals being attacked in the United States, it's always going to outweigh on magnitude, and you're always going to be preferring this. Additionally, on the critique. Extend across the DA that when you erase this entirely, you change history. They say that they are not, that we are erasing history by calling them the Islamic State, but we would say that this is the word that this is what they asked us to call them, and this is what they have projected to the world, which means that this is until proven that it's like a bad idea. This was probably not an offensive thing to do. If someone asks you to call them by their name and you call them by their name, you are not being offensive. Additionally, they never tell you how we you're not being offensive. You're erasing history by trying to get rid of this terminology entirely. It is important to have the terminology there to understand how the grouping of cultures has been a bad thing in the past. If we can't understand that the grouping of cultures has led to the impacts of their decay, then we never have the ability to learn from this in the future, which means that you still link to the disadvantage of erasing history, making it so that way we can never solve down the road. Yes.
Example of this is the Taliban and Tahiti Taliban, where we refuse to call the Tahiti by their original name, which has led us to extending the conflict.
Yeah, you can look to the conflation between the two different types of Taliban, and that has led to an extension of this. But the point of that argument, they don't engage with it, is that when we don't realize that we have done this in the past and lumped cultures together, then we don't realize it in the future, meaning that you will only recreate the implications of your critique. You can just look to the fact that they do not put enough framework on this debate. They do not give you a way to rate it, to weigh this. And you can extend across the arguments that policy making is important for good policy. We perm the implicit all, because you run a critique without an all. You don't gain any solvency. Rejection of the team is not key. Rejection of the language is. If you gain that without the ballot, there's absolutely no reason to give them the ballot, because you can reject the language without winning the debate round.
Okay, congratulations on reaching levels.
Yes.
Accomplishment, you should be proud of that. 2-1 decision. I'm speaking first, so I sat.
In favor of the negation.
In favor of the indication, I'm sorry. I voted now. I can certainly be easy to vote neg. I kind of think they're right, though, that the framework debate is not at all clear for me. And, I can even discount the solvency arguments that the PMR makes. The point of order, I think, is irrelevant. I don't have a good argument about net benefits. Maybe I missed it. I just have an argument that says rhetoric shifts reality, and that stopping stuff like this stops a lot of very bad things in the future, which are impacts. So is the case. So even if I sort of give this criticism full solvency, I think the case still outweighs. I do think you need to do a better job of answering the rejection will make you psychologically cured of this.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of room to make a lot of answers there.
Yeah.
That probably don't do. Probably we're not expecting them. I don't think anybody was expecting you to do this. So, and again, whatever they're going to say, I'm going to see their perspective as well. But for me, the framework is not clear. There's not a clear all. I'm not sure, what I'm supposed to vote for, other than, assume some solvency of these very general impacts. So I'll end up weighing, these sort of like ongoing Islamophobia, which is very bad and will lead to very bad things, versus the ability of the plan to stop things like genocide and culturicide, which are also very, very bad. So that's kind of how I saw it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I vote negative. I vote negative. I think that the negative is winning the framework debate, actually, specifically on the analysis of rhetorical accountability. This is because of two reasons. I buy that people, I do believe that people in our activity are more likely to become educators and lawyers. Even if I buy your 70% of Congress are debaters, which is true, 70% of debaters aren't congresspersons. which means that even if I understand that PMR analysis, even if I grant you that, the MO has still preempted that by telling me that the problem with policymakers right now is that policymakers are not held accountable for their words, which means that that is preempted. So there needs to be an answer to that in order for me to better understand, to better give you access to framework debate. I think I think that your impact framing of cultural genocide is probably a good way to go with the debate, and I think that was a strategic decision. Unfortunately, I don't think you get access to that impact before they get access to their root cause to terrorism impacts because of the framework issue. This means that the K debate circumvents the cultural genocide impacts and comes first. So I come to solvency. Does the negative solve without an alternative? Does it even have to? The MO has also preempted this argument, and it comes from the Yellow Seashell, that they don't have to solve for bad language in every instance. And I think that the very clear example of this was especially helpful in making me understand this argument very well. They only need to solve for this one instance. They're arguing that you should be rejected for not using the phrase gayish in this specific instance. That is one instance that you should be held accountable for. Also, there are rejection solves arguments that are not answered in the MG adequately. I think rejection doesn't solve arguments would be better. This might come also from the understanding that there's not an alternative to the criticism. I've seen them run language criticism before, so I know that they don't put alternatives on their criticism, so that might have helped me understand that a little bit better, but I was with them the whole time. There wasn't an actual alternative. So that brings me to the LOR, to the permutation, which is true. The LOR is right. I don't think a permutation can exist without an alternative. And even if it could, I wouldn't buy the permutation anyways, because the PMR, this is the issue that I have with the PMR, it goes for two conflicting positions. You say throughout the entirety of your speech, you shouldn't reject us for using bad language, we're sorry, but then you also say that projecting ISIS and redefining them in this word is bad and offensive. I think that this is problematic because I think it is a relink. I think that you either need to go hard for like projection bad, ISIS, hedge and renaming is worse than ISIS, or you need to go for like, hey, we're sorry. I think in the MO it's cool to go for both. In the MG I think it's fine to go for both, but I think in the PMR you gotta pick one. So it makes it especially hard for me to buy any sort of permutation that could exist because of the fact that even in the PMR we are not accounting for our language. This leads me to the root. So the impacts, if it's the root cause of terrorism and in Turin's case, then terrorism is the first impact according to the framing debate. I vote for the negative.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, if you said something racist, I'd probably vote against you before your speech was over. So, like, that's the framework that the negative team sets up for this rank, right? They don't necessarily read a 5-point framework with subpoint 2 little I, subpoint 9, right? They're just saying, look, this is the way that we should view debate. Very simply. And I appreciate, like, this is what's good for debate, right? Is to try to understand how we should interact. I think there are some problems with this particular criticism in how it affects the affirmative, right? Like, they're saying that because this language has negative connotations for other people, you should be punished. That's like telling people that are part of smaller communities who like self-identify in those ways that they can't use language that identify themselves, right? I think that if you're going to go for any argument on the flow, you go for 4.5 minutes of self-identification is more important than how other people view us using this language, right? And I think that if you're going to do the permutation that I have very explicitly, this is an up-down vote on Islamophobia. Like, that's what their alternative, or what their criticism is, right? Is that I am supposed to be rejecting this form of Islamophobia via the criticism, and like there's some things in the criticism that I think could definitely be worked on, but for the most part, like I think that reject alternatives are all, like that's all they're doing is just saying don't vote for them. And even if they don't say don't vote for them and say alternative, don't vote for them, like you can seriously pick that up, I think, as like part of the impact to the criticism is that you lose for being racist or whatever they're trying to like make a connection between. I think that this debate round is lost earlier than that, though. I think it's lost in the MG overview, right? Like your order putting a criticism, the very last thing in the debate, Corey,
Yeah.
is not something that I think you can do ever again.
Okay.
And that's because like they went for the thing that you touched the least, not necessarily the thing that they wanted to go for the most. And you always want to put things like this, I think, closer to the top.
Yeah, anytime that you can't compare the impacts because you were framing out a debate for some reason, that should be your first thing you address. It's like if you just like put a counterpoint on bottom. Like I think that any opportunity for you to, if you like concede all the disadvantage, but you're somehow able to do some impact prioritization in the PMR, I think you're in a better position than losing a framework, like the potential of losing a framework debate.
Yeah.
Because this is TerraBad, though, like, I'm not trying to be mean or anything, like, when I say it's TerraBad, but, like, I think it's a terrible concept to be, like, Westerners and non-like, ISIS members get to decide what we call that group. And, like, that's right, that's why we were able to call black people the N-word, as you kind of talked about before, right? They didn't consent to that, we consented to that. Your criticism's probably a straight turn to itself.
That makes sense.
Alright, thank you.
Thank you.
Much love, all. Much love.
Good luck on that first time.